Good evening and thanks for joining us. The top stories today. Hurricane Laura makes landfall in the heart of the U.S. oil industry. It's forcing oil rigs and refineries to shut down. The Federal Reserve unveils a landmark policy shift. We talked to FX Street's senior analyst Joseph Trevisani to get his take. Over half of San Francisco's storefront businesses are closed down. We spoke to a small business owner earlier today. He says he's lost 95% of his revenue because of the lockdown. And China says it's willing to let the U.S. audit its state-owned enterprises. This comes after U.S. officials push for new rules that could delist Chinese companies from U.S. stock exchanges. Energy companies are reviewing damage to oil operations in the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane Laura swept through prime oil production fields, causing over 300,000 offshore platforms to be evacuated. 6 refinery plants closed ahead of the storm's arrival. Even if there's no damage, it could take days for refineries to resume operations. Laura brought 150-mile-per-hour winds to Louisiana early this morning. It cut power to over 400,000 people in Louisiana and Texas, and authorities ordered nearly 600,000 to evacuate. FEMA says resources are in place to help in the weeks and months ahead. And President Trump talked to FEMA about the damage this afternoon. He says he'll probably visit Texas and Louisiana this weekend. And the number of new unemployment claims exceeded 1 million again last week. It's another gut punch for the jobs market as the economy struggles to recover.
Weekly unemployment claims hit a peak of nearly 7 million several months ago. It finally fell below the 1 million mark 3 weeks back for the first time since March. This fueled hopes that the labor market recovery would continue. But with weekly unemployment filings now stuck at around 1 million, concern is growing that the V-shaped recovery may flatten or dip down again. New CCP virus infections have broadly subsided after a resurgence through the summer, but some hotspots remain. Economists and Federal Reserve officials have repeatedly warned that the path to recovery would largely depend on whether the virus continues to pose a threat to public health. And with government stimulus tapering off and talks stalled on another relief bill, signs are growing that the economy's recovery from the pandemic is slowing.
And the first department store ever established in the United States is closing its doors for good. Lord & Taylor announced Thursday it will have to shut down all 38 remaining stores. The high-end retailer was in business for 194 years. Lord & Taylor filed for bankruptcy on August 2nd. The company originally planned to leave some locations open, but the retailer said it was a better financial decision to close all of them. The liquidator for the company said customers can expect deep discounts on merchandise both in stores and online. And unfortunately, Lord & Taylor isn't alone. San Francisco's Chamber of Commerce says over half of the city's storefront businesses have closed down. We spoke to a devastated gym owner who says he's still fighting for his livelihood. Indoor gyms and salons there are still closed. Here's Dave Carragher, co-owner at MX3 Fitness.
We got 5% of our revenue back, but we were down 95% with them. So that's not a solution. We need a solution from the city immediately, or you're just going to see a complete avalanche of closures of businesses in San Francisco. These are these small neighborhood businesses that create the fabric of local neighborhoods. And once they're gone, there's no one that's going to come back and fill those storefronts. There's no business waiting to jump into those empty storefronts. And all of them have zero idea when they're going to reopen. And once they are told they can reopen, we don't have any idea of what we need to do to reopen because the city hasn't provided us with any reopening plans. You take what you're seeing in New York and multiply it by 100 in terms of the boarded up storefronts. It looks like a ghost town. It looks like a weird zombie ghost town. We are not far behind what New York did, which was to sue the state. And legal action is not out of the question because at this point, we're at a level of desperation where it's do something drastic.
And walking around New York City, I would say things aren't much better here. Now, the Federal Reserve and other authorities say that retail sales are back to pre-pandemic levels. To be honest, I was shocked to hear that. I asked Greg Barilla, New York State Director for the National Federation of Independent Businesses, if his members fall into that category.
Absolutely not, nor do members of NFIB, which comprise small businesses across this state, New York City, and across the country. What the Fed, I believe, is referring to is an uptick and a rebound in retail sales from huge, big box corporate retailers. Just last week, we saw Target reported the greatest percentage increase in quarterly sales in the company's history. Walmart's sales are through the roof. Home Depot sales increased, I think, 20 or 25% this past quarter. Wayfair has reported that its revenue is nearly 80% more year over year. That's where we're seeing this. In these online big box retailers. We're not seeing it in the small businesses that you and I love on main streets across the state, across this country, and in commercial corridors across New York City.
And tell me a little bit about how your members are feeling at the moment.
The same thing they've been feeling this entire time. An incredible amount of uncertainty, an incredible amount of anxiety. Some federal programs, namely the Paycheck Protection Program, was absolutely a lifeline for many small businesses. But we're getting to a point where many businesses, particularly in New York State and in New York City, they don't have a clear sight line for their future. They don't know when they'll be able to reopen and re-establish operations that resemble normalcy. So these PPP loans are coming due. The funding is being used. We need to have another relief package from Congress, and New York State needs to start looking at what it can do to support small businesses.
And is there anything different or any add-ons from the PPP and these other programs that you guys would like to see?
Absolutely. So just take the PPP program, which again, our members have been overwhelmingly satisfied with. That being said, it was trillions of dollars negotiated in a matter of days with a priority on getting that money out and into the economy as soon as possible. It was bound to be imperfect. First, we saw some businesses and entities that nobody would classify as a small business find legal loopholes to receive that funding. But also, it's a little bit too strict. Take New York City, for example, where your rent or mortgage, your general real estate costs are significantly higher and a bigger percentage of your total overhead than most of the country. We'd like to see a little bit more flexibility in the PPP program so that New York City small businesses could apply more of it to, for example, their real estate costs, rents and mortgages.
And we see Mayor de Blasio, I believe it was just earlier this week, saying that restaurants here in this city and other similar businesses mightn't be able to open into, I want to paraphrase him, sometime in 2021. How does that make you feel?
The biggest problem with a statement like that is it just fuels the uncertainty and anxiety that our members and small businesses are experiencing. I don't expect Mayor de Blasio or anybody else to have all the answers. None of us do. But I think you need to be speaking with these small businesses and working with them to find a concrete plan forward. Do what you can to give them some sort of idea about when their operations can resume, when they'll be able to have limited seating inside. Small businesses are problem solvers by nature. They will figure out a way, by and large, to survive and re-energize this economy.
And very quickly, Greg, we heard some calls from some quarters, I believe there was some large realtor even was begging the bigger corporations to bring their people back to work in the city. He said that there are small businesses, all types of businesses who rely on these people. Just how big an impact, and it might be a very obvious answer, but the lack of universities, the lack of these big corporations in the city, what will it mean for the smaller companies here who are trying to survive?
It's incredibly problematic for all the businesses up and down the economic chain. New York City obviously relies a lot upon day workers who work in the city but live in its suburbs or other areas outside of the city. It relies heavily on tourism, and we don't know when those things are going to return to normal levels. So that's very concerning, and I absolutely echo that concern. That being said, not many people have ever made a living betting against New York City. We saw it after 9/11. We've seen it in other instances over the course of the city and the country's history. So I have nothing but optimism for the future of New York City, but these are very, very difficult questions.
Yeah. Our hearts are with you anyway, Greg. Small business, independent business, so important to the heart of a city and the heart of a state. So, Greg, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Anytime. Be well.
And while business owners are struggling and another 1 million people filed for unemployment, the White House and congressional Democrats are split at an impasse on a relief bill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Trump's Chief of Staff Mark Meadows talked for the first time today after 3 weeks. But there's still no sign of progress. Earlier today, Pelosi said Democrats are not backing down.
We're not budging. Understand this. They have to move. They have to move. Why should there be a bill that has far less what the public needs? We have that responsibility. And they're just going to have to come up with more money. We need a flood of money for this. We have a pandemic.
Yesterday, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said it's possible there won't be any deal till the end of September. And today in the markets, the S&P 500 and the Dow advanced. On Thursday, shares of Abbott Laboratories jumped after the company won U.S. approval to market a rapid CCP virus antigen test. The Fed's aggressive new economic recovery strategy sent Treasury yields higher, and the Dow has turned positive for the year. What a year. A new report says that over 80% of Fortune 500 CFOs, though, think the U.S. stock market is overvalued. The Dow rose over 160 points, or 0.57%, and the Nasdaq dropped nearly 40 points, or 0.34%. And the Federal Reserve has a new monetary policy framework. It will now allow inflation to sometimes go over its usual 2% target. They want to achieve an average inflation of 2% over time. Fed Chair Jerome Powell announced the new strategy today.
We have also made important changes with regard to the price stability side of our mandate. Our longer run goal continues to be an inflation rate of 2%. However, if inflation runs below 2% following economic downturns, but never moves above 2% even when the economy is strong, then over time, inflation will average less than 2%. This change reflects our appreciation for the benefits of a strong labor market, particularly for many in low and moderate income communities.
So to encourage inflation, it means interest rates will likely stay near zero for years to come. And analysts are split on what the impact of the change will be. Some think it will open the door for massive inflation, but others think there are deflationary factors which will offset the change. Some even say the change is nothing new for the Fed. It's been unsuccessful in trying to bring inflation for years. I asked Joseph Trevisani, senior analyst at FX Street, if he thinks it'll change much.
I don't. I mean, what Mr. Powell did was prepare for the future. The Fed has had a great deal of trouble raising inflation to their 2% target. In fact, they've been uniformly unsuccessful, except for 1 year in 2018, since the financial crisis. Have any sort of impact, they're going to have to do it by letting inflation run over 2% for a certain amount of time to get the balance to the average. That's really what they're preparing for. But for the moment, and I think for the immediate future, there doesn't seem to be any danger that inflation is going to be headed towards 2%. There are many other factors involved here that I think are acting as a balance, as a counterbalance against the enormous amounts of liquidity that the Fed has supplied to the economy over the past 10 years.
And what would they be, Joseph?
Well, primarily it's the globalization of production and consumption. It is now everywhere, and domestic firms and retailers here in the United States and elsewhere, not just the United States, have a great deal of trouble raising rates. They have no real pricing power anymore because of the enormous impact of overseas production, which is now easily accessible to almost everyone.
And do you think this could possibly change in the future with maybe we see the president talking about more, say, domestic manufacturing, deglobalization, these types of things?
I don't think so. These types of movements are so widespread and so organic in an economy and in the world economy that there's really no way to fence off your particular economy. I mean, you could do what North Korea does and never participate in anything, but that's not very beneficial to its population. over time is this field becomes normal for everyone. And then there might be ways for manufacturers and for retailers to make some inroads on pricing. But for the moment, I think everyone is very constrained by this new playing field.
Joseph, I really appreciate your insights as always. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And still to come, Walmart says it's joining the bid to buy TikTok. Microsoft and Walmart will together try to secure a deal to buy the app's US operations. And Australia's Prime Minister announces a new bill to exercise power over foreign state contracts in the country. It could stop China's soft power initiatives. That and more after the break. About 6% of the news. TikTok's parent company is trying to sell US operations of the app after President Trump's executive order effectively bans its use in the US. Legislators have deemed the app a national security threat, and TikTok and its Chinese parent company sued the US government in retaliation. Walmart's push comes on the same day TikTok CEO Kevin Mayer announced his resignation. And China is proposing to let US regulators audit its state-owned enterprises. The concession aims to solve their long-running accounting dispute with the US government. This as the US paves the way for the delisting of Chinese companies from the US stock exchanges.
According to Bloomberg, China is now saying that US regulators can audit Chinese companies, including its most sensitive state-controlled ones. The standoff has been ongoing for years now, and previously the regime has refused US audits, claiming it was a national security risk. Vice Chairman of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, or CSRC, Fang Xinghai, said on Wednesday that China sincerely wants to move past the standoff. China's concession comes as the Trump administration recently made it clear that Chinese companies risk being struck off US stock exchanges. Delisting could affect large companies including Alibaba and Baidu if the US standards on audits are not met. The CRC sent the US's Public Company Accounting Oversight Board a fresh proposal for a trial audit run of any state-owned company. The proposal would allow the Chinese Communist Party to censor sensitive information in the audit reports. In 2017, a trial audit failed to reach an agreement between both countries. When Fang was asked about why there hasn't been another since, he said it could be down to the general atmosphere.
And Australia is introducing new laws that will likely put a stop to state and local arrangements with Beijing. That is, if they aren't consistent with Australia's foreign policy or its national interest.
The proposed Foreign Relations Bill would give Australia's federal government powers to cancel any agreements public institutions or local authorities have with foreign governments. Controversial initiatives like the Belt and Road in the state of Victoria, Confucius Institutes in Australian universities, academic partnerships with Chinese institutions, sister city agreements with Chinese authorities, even the Port of Darwin lease are all ongoing initiatives that could be stopped in their tracks if the new bill is passed. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said if they are inconsistent with national interest, they'll go.
We need to ensure that Australia, not just at a federal level, but across all of our governments, speak with one voice, act in accordance with one plan, consistent with the national interest as set out in Australia's foreign policy.
Federal opposition leader Anthony Albanese also supports the principle behind the legislation. If passed, local governments will need to notify Foreign Minister Marise Payne of plans to negotiate with a foreign government. She'd have the authority to review, approve or veto agreements between foreign governments and public Australian entities, that is if they are inconsistent with Australia's foreign policy or harm relations with other countries. Approved agreements can also be revoked later. The new legislation does not include commercial corporations or state-owned enterprises.
And Ford is teaming up with real estate developer Bedrock and global tech supplier Bosch to help making parking easier. They're creating an automated valet parking garage demo in Detroit. They'll be using Ford Escape test vehicles that can drive and park themselves. which they'll do in a parking garage owned by Bedrock. The project will use smart technology from Bosch. Drivers will leave the car in a designated area, then they'll use a smartphone app to automatically park their car. The app will also be used when the driver wants the vehicle returned to them at a designated pickup area. The project is running for tenants of the Bedrock building and private demonstrations through the end of September. And a village in southern Italy is offering free accommodations to visitors to help boost tourism there. The program has proved so popular that all local homestays are now booked for the entire season.
This group of 4 friends traveled from Piedmont to spend some time visiting the villages San Giovanni and Galdo and take in the beautiful hilly views. Their accommodations are free of charge thanks to a local initiative to attract visitors to the region.
There are incredible landscapes, green, a lot of green. It's almost like a postcard. And then there is hospitality. Everyone welcomes you around the region.
One of the visitors, Fabiana Palmieri, said the local hospitality is what she really appreciated. Stefano Trotta, president of the Amici del Moruto Association, came up with the idea to give visibility to the often overlooked region. In just a few weeks, the initiative has proven its success. There's only one requirement to apply. Visitors must not be residents of Molise or have homes or relatives in the region.
We received more than 8,000 applications from all over the world: America, Canada, Australia, France, Germany, Norway, Russia, Kazakhstan, Asia.
Trotta said the charm of the program is building friendships between visitors and the locals.
We introduce them to our traditions, our history, our culture, and we have dinner together. We share opinions, points of view, and it's a great opportunity to create friendships.
After seeing the project succeed and the amount of requests pouring in, Mayor of San Giovanni and Galdo, Domenico Credico, intends to convince more towns in the region to offer similar opportunities next year.
We need to use this new beginning to show that this is the direction we must take. Not massive tourism, but slow tourism. For those who come here to see places that are not well known and want to enjoy them.
With usually just over a mere 500 residents, San Giovanni and Galdo is now successfully attracting new faces and making its name known among worldwide visitors.
And that's the latest business updates for today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.